Welcome to our CCGL group project where we will be discussing the Japanese asset market bubble to the global financial crisis. So, the Japanese market bubble in 1989 is often referred to as the lost decade, as the violent collapse of the bubble led to a stagnation in the Japanese economy for 10 years, during which the growth of the Japanese GDP remained close to 0%. Some even believe that Japan fell into a liquidity trap, meaning that the conditions of the Japanese economy failed to improve even after liquidity has been injected into the market, due to the factors such as individuals believing market prospects to be futile and hence restraining from making investments or saving. How did the Japanese asset market bubble come about? Prior to the buildup of bubbles, the Japanese economy had been in great conditions, as Japan achieved an extreme success from its electronic manufacturing industry, especially in the international market. In fact, the Japanese economy boasts an average annual growth of 6% between 1960 and 1990s. This led to a huge improvement in the Japanese households' condition of living and established a national atmosphere of euphoria, which encouraged both savings and investments. Simultaneously, the US was suffering from a huge economic recessions in the 1970s and the highly appreciated US dollar value. Hence, the US proposed the Plaza Accord in 1985, which called for the depreciation of US dollar against yen and German mark in an attempt to benefit the US exports. After the Plaza Accord was signed, the Japanese yen started to appreciate at a very rapid pace, and the exchange value of dollar versus yen declined by 51% in just 2 years. This led to a decrease in competitive advantage of Japan in the export market, on which the Japanese economy had been relying heavily on. In an attempt to mitigate the effect of yen's rapid appreciation and to support domestic market instead of focusing on the exports, the Bank of Japan imposed a drastic monetary easing measure to lower the interest rate. In addition to the accumulation of wealth in the market from the thriving economy, the the lowered interest rate from the drastic easing policy encouraged more investment. And the value of land and housing assets began to increase in the popular belief that the value of land will never decrease. As the value of these assets started increasing, more investors attempted to purchase land and used very land that they purchased as collateral to claim more loans for more land, leading to again increased asset value of land, and so on. This vicious cycle continued, leading to the formation of a bubble in the Japanese asset property market. Although the Bank of Japan increased the discount rate on May 1989 after recognizing the bubble in the property market, the bubble burst nonetheless. The consequences of the burst of Japan's bubble can be analyzed from four different perspectives. One of the most noticeable and drastic changes were observed in the crash in asset prices all over Japan. Although the entire nation suffered from the bubble burst, the degree to which asset prices fell primarily depended on three factors: the size of the city, the distance from Tokyo and Osaka metropolis, and the historical importance of the city in the central government's policy. In fact, cities close to Tokyo seemed to experience a greater drop in asset prices compared to cities further from the metropolis. The impact on households is also quite significant. As a result of the bubble burst, households have shown a decrease in direct consumption and investment within Japan, putting the domestic economy in threat of long-term deflation. In fact, as a result of the burst, real income of the households suffered from a sharp dip, hurting consumer confidence. Moving on to corporates, the Nikkei 225, the stock market index for the Tokyo Stock Exchange, dropped from 3,815 in 1989 to only 14,309 3 years later. A staggering 60% drop in stock prices was a result of lowered investment. Capital leakage took place as uncertainty over the domestic market meant that investments were directed out of the country. Also, as a result of investment escaping the country, domestic manufacturers lost their comparative advantage due to lack of investment. This was most obvious in technological industries as it was a rapidly developing industry, meaning that any delay in investment immediately led to loss in technological degree. Last but not least, the financial and banking sector was put in an awkward situation where they had access to money but without a viable option to spend the money on. The burst of the bubble gave birth to zombie companies, which were companies that operated and maintained financial health with no prospect for future investment, worsening the situation that the Japanese economy was in. Now we would like to discuss the financial crisis in 2008. It could be argued that the crisis was triggered by the housing market bubble. There are mainly three factors that created this bubble. The first is the abundance of cheap credits. In 2008, Alan Greenspan, the chairman of Federal Reserve, lowered the federal interest rate to 1%. Investors stopped buying treasury bills and instead turned to investing in the booming housing market using the cheap and easily obtainable credit. The abundance of cheap credits allowed the bank to go crazy with leverage and to form bubble in the housing market. In addition, there were also foreign inflows which contributed to rapid rise in housing price. The second reason behind the crisis is the increase in subprime mortgages. With the low interest rate, investors invested heavily on collateralized debt obligations, known as CDOs. Even though the demand for CDOs was increasing, people who were qualified for a mortgage was scarce. To meet the demand, banks started to sell subprime mortgages, which included features such as higher rate of interest, no down payment, and adjustable rate mortgage. Rising house price played an important role in the growth of subprime mortgages because bankers could compensate the loss whenever homeowners default on these mortgages. However, this rise was responsible for the household debt to increase immensely. The subprime mortgage loans started to collapse as the interest rate hiked up, causing more homeowners to default on their subprime mortgages. Now, the last factor that caused the crisis is unregulated derivatives such as mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps. Through CDS, the buyer of a credit default swap receives credit protection, whereas the seller of the swap guarantees the creditworthiness of the debt security. Bond purchasers bought credit default swaps as insurance, which gave a misleading sense of security to bond purchasers, leading them to buy riskier debts. MBS also played a deadly role in creating subprime financial crisis. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac also purchased a huge number of mortgages and put them into MBS. These institutions later sold them to investors through securitization. Low return, low risk, and high rating increased the demand of MBS. During the real estate boom, MBS allowed more people to purchase mortgages than they could afford. It also eliminated a discipline for ethical lending practices, as lenders such as bankers or brokers did not take a full responsibility in the consequences when the borrowers defaulted. Therefore, the banks weren't meticulous in measuring the credit score of the borrower, leading to higher foreclosure rates. The consequences of the 2008 financial crisis was not only economic but also human. First of all, a number of financial institutions, including the Lehman Brothers and AIG, declared bankruptcy. Their portfolios were full of toxic assets that were in dire need of government bailout. This resulted in the Obama administration to sign one of the biggest bailout programs of American history, known as Toxic Assets Relief Program, or TARP. This bailout package consisted of $700 billion in bailouts money, and they were used to purchase large stakes in well-known banks including the Citigroup, AIG, Bank of America, and more. Looking at the figures, it was clear that the general health of the economy suffered. GDP fell by 5.4 and 6.4% in the last quarter of 2007 and the first quarter of 2009. People's income fell dramatically as income shrank by an estimated $648 billion due to slower economic growth. Household wealth was also affected as the value of families' equity holdings fell by 1.9 trillion from the middle of 2007 to the end of March 2009. This amounts to approximately $97,000 per household. Housing prices fell dramatically as $3 trillion in real estate wealth was wiped off between July 2008 to March 2009. The stock market was also affected with a staggering 7.4 trillion of stock wealth being wiped off. From the human perspective, unemployment rates soared up as the crisis unfolded and roughly 5.5 million Americans lost their jobs due to the crisis. Moreover, many people that have defaulted were evicted or were given eviction notices. Signs that indicated home foreclosures were prevalent around America at the time, and cities suffered from the surge of homeless people. By 2010, an estimated 64 million people were under the extreme poverty threshold. Poverty rate increased from 9.8% in 2007 to 10.3% in 2008, as 396,000 additional families fell into poverty.